I gazed at my wife of 5 years and stated, "Aaron, there is no middle ground. Either he or I must leave." She was seated next to my nominal superior, Plato Giannis, and held his well-manicured hand until I spoke. Then, she removed her hand and an expression of confusion and fear appeared on her beautiful face. She shook her head in surprise, causing her blonde hair to glisten in the lamplight. "Everything will be back to normal on Monday. Could you not enjoy Elle for now?" La is La Logan, her real name. Ellen Johnson is seated adjacent to me and has been making highly intense attempts to seduce me for the last few hours. She is a woman of striking beauty with luxuriant dark hair and one of the most impressive physiques in the world, particularly if one is partial to curves, which I most certainly am. There are also rumors that she is a highly accomplished individual. This is all part of Plato's elaborate scheme. When Aaron and I were invited to this island for a weekend, it was assumed that he simply wished to become better acquainted with me. I am a renowned author, and he purchased the publishing corporation that published my work was the subject of a scandal approximately 3 months ago. In fact, the entire weekend was orchestrated by Plato with the explicit intention of engaging in sexual intercourse with my wife. I am a mediocre writer, the author of detective novels and thrillers. My protagonist, Rick Rucker, is capable of solving the mysteries of locked rooms and escaping from the clutches of deranged individuals. He also has a diverse and intriguing sexual history, rapidly seducing beautiful women. Additionally, he is a highly skilled martial artist and trained assassin. He is a multifaceted individual, a fantasy character cloaked in a thin layer of reality. His books sell well, but the publishing house has several more prominent and better-selling writers. I am simply a writer with a beautiful wife who caught the attention of Plato. They met at a gala dinner and dance that Plato, Mr. G, and his stable of writers and editors attended. The party was impressive, and Aaron was impressed. She was especially impressed when she and Mr. G danced to several musical numbers. He is polished, 10 years older than 28. 1 year Aaron, the older gentleman, is distinguished by his long dark hair and imposing stature. As I observed their dance, I noted his agile movements. When the group took a respite, they returned to our table. Mr. G acknowledged Donald's wife's admirable dancing abilities. I acknowledged his praise with a nod, though my response seemed to momentarily stump him. He then excused himself to attend to other guests, remarking that it was a pleasure to have me as his guest. Mrs. Aaron smiled and replied, mutually. I looked at her, contemplating the rapid transition from Mr. G to Plato, I inquired, impressed with my superior. Oh, yes, she is quite lovely, and she bestowed upon me a lascivious grin. Let us observe who will be the next spouse of his to be wooed. She was revealed to be the wife of one of the editors. During the evening, 3 more such instances occurred. This occurred a month ago. My name is Donald Lake. There is no nickname. My height is approximately 6 feet, and my weight is 169 pounds. My hair is curly and brown, and my eyes are blue. I am in good physical shape and athletic. Aaron is also in good shape. She practices fencing, which is a sport of skill and coordination. I subsequently encountered her at a fencing lesson she was conducting. I was engaged in the customary research for Rick, who was scheduled to engage in swordplay in the forthcoming installment of the series, entitled The Adventurer. I undertake comprehensive research prior to composing an adventure book, as this is one of my principal strengths. I emulated the trajectory of Rick, ascending a precipitous staircase and ultimately becoming a writer. He completed high school but did not pursue further education, a decision that I also made. By the age of 10, I had already identified myself as a writer. Throughout my academic career, I continued to write, producing numerous stories. 2 of these were published in relatively obscure literary magazines. I considered myself a serious writer until I had to enter the workforce after completing my studies. I initially worked as a car mechanic, a position I found enjoyable, but the remuneration was insufficient. I then began writing thrillers and The Miracle of Miracles, the latter of which sold, along with 2 subsequent works. My current publisher signed me after I sent them my first Rick Rucker manuscript. The novel was assigned an editor, Sally Baker. We rapidly established a rapport with her. She is affable but deeply married, with children in elementary school at the time. It was during the writing of the second Rucker book that I met Aaron. I completed the book after receiving advice from her about a sword duel, and we went on several dates, which soon ended in sexual intercourse. The experience was mutually enjoyable, and we were pleased with the outcome when we met. Aaron was employed at the time in her own music store. She is not a wealthy woman and was able to survive the initial stages of starting a business thanks to loans from a family trust. In one section of the store, all kinds of instruments were sold, and in the other, there were recordings of music of all kinds and sheet music. Fencing was just a hobby. When we got married, she was 23 years old, and I was as happy as I thought it was possible to be. We had plans for children and very soon, but my publishing house was sold to Mr. G. As Aaron notes, one day Aaron returned home with great enthusiasm. The following weekend, Plato extended an invitation to his island. I gazed at her, inquiring about the specifics of the situation. How could he be sharing this information with me, rather than directly with Mr. G? I encountered Mr. G last week and had lunch with him. I then provided him with a tour of the store. He called with an invitation, stating that he wished to become better acquainted with the writers. I anticipate that he will contact you soon, but I have a question regarding his communication with you. Has he contacted you, and how many of you has he contacted? She turned slightly pale. Nothing like that happened, she said. Donnie, you're being paranoid. This is not paranoia. Tell me why you did not mention lunch and shopping until today. This was last week, right? She turned away. Okay, Donald, she continued. He kind of hit on me. I rebuffed him, but I did not say anything because I thought you would get in trouble. He is the owner of the company, after all. Now, you seem delighted with the idea of visiting him on the island. I've heard about this place. How many more people will be there? Just you and me. A special friend will also be in attendance, as will the staff. It would appear that the intention is to facilitate a more comprehensive introduction to all of you. I am confident that I can manage this. Are you certain that you can handle it? I must decline the invitation. It is, however, a shame, as I am sure you will find it most enjoyable. I am reluctant to accept, Donnie, but I feel that I must. She was visibly disgruntled for the remainder of the evening. The following day, I telephoned the main office and requested to speak with Mr. G. He called me back. Approximately 15 minutes later, he called again, greeting Donald and expressing his enthusiasm for their upcoming weekend excursion. However, I must respectfully decline, Mr. G. I am not at ease with this arrangement. It appears that my wife was aware of the plan, yet I was not informed. In fact, I believe she had lunch with you, but she did not inform me. She stated that you were persistently contacting her, and she was concerned that I would react adversely if I were to learn the full extent of your interactions. She was correct in her assessment, Donald. I genuinely value Aaron for numerous reasons. She is a striking individual, but I am capable of maintaining my composure. She is an entrepreneur like I consider myself to be one of your most profitable writers. I would like to get to know you both better. I am sorry, Mr. G, but I feel that your opinion is misguided. I wish you would reconsider your stance. I will keep the weekend free at this point. We separated approximately 3 hours later as I was finishing the next Rick book. I received a call from my agent, Brock Levin. Mr. G declined your invitation. Why? How do you even know about this? Brock, the vice president of sales, called me. He insists that you should go otherwise. It is possible that the new book will be under-advertised, which will have a detrimental impact on both of us, given that we live off interest. Did he threaten this? Not directly, but the threat was made. This individual employs a particularly aggressive strategy. I informed Brock that I would contact him after hanging up. I then emailed Sally the ending of the new book, along with some instructions. Subsequently, she called and we discussed everything. In the interim, I devoted considerable time to studying Plato, Janus, and his island. The island was called hedonism in Greek, meaning pleasure. It is interesting to note that the name Pleasure Island is also used in the context of the fictional Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in the Harry Potter series. I conducted further research and discovered multiple accounts of sexual misconduct on the island. Additionally, there were 2 instances of divorce where the island was cited as the basis, as documented in gossip. There were also several photographs of Mr. G with women, 2 of whom were married. These findings raised concerns. I utilized Google Maps to gain a more comprehensive understanding of the island's geography. My research revealed that the island spans approximately 2 miles in length and 1 mile in width. It is situated off the coast of North Carolina, surrounded by other islands where individuals engage in various activities. The island offers opportunities for leisure activities such as golf and beach holidays. It is situated in a south-facing location, providing protection from the elements. It comprises 2 peaks and a number of structures, including a substantial residence. Recreational facilities include tennis courts and a swimming pool. However, the presence of a swimming pool may be redundant given the proximity of beaches of an excellent quality. A comprehensive set of detailed photographs of the island was obtained and used to create a topographic map. It was observed that a suitable vessel, such as a boat or seaplane, would be required for transportation to and from the island. However, neither of these resources is currently available to me. Nevertheless, I am acquainted with individuals who possess both. On Friday, Aaron returned home at the appointed hour. He entered the house, where he was greeted with evident joy at the prospect of dinner. I partook of a substantial chicken salad accompanied by white wine. While they were eating, Aaron made an announcement. "I have been informed that you may have reconsidered your decision not to visit the island." I regarded her with a quizzical expression. She replied, "I was told that you have the option of changing your mind at lunch." "That is not entirely accurate," he replied. "He is currently in New York, whereas we are situated in Virginia." He proceeded to inform me that he had contacted the individual in question, who informed him that he had an apartment in Manhattan. I was perplexed by this revelation. "How do you know he is in New York?" I inquired. "He told me so," he replied. "He said that if we agreed, he would order his plane to take us from the national airport, but we won't agree." "That is not entirely accurate," I countered. "He has not changed his mind." "Don't turn your paranoia on me," he retorted. "Donald Lake also mentioned that if we agreed, he would order his plane to take us from the national airport. However, we have not yet agreed to this proposal." "Aaron, I must reiterate that I have not changed my mind." "Donald Lake, you are so inflexible in your opinions." "Aaron, you are free to go if you wish." "I will not be able to enjoy myself there because I will be preoccupied with worrying about you. We will ultimately be divorced." "Are you intending to engage in sexual intercourse with him?" "I refuse to accompany you unless you agree to this." "Don, how can you possibly do so if I go alone?" "There is a significant risk of something occurring, and it will happen when you return. We will never again engage in sexual intercourse together." "Donnie, I am not denying that I am attracted to him, but you and I are still more attractive than—" "I would not take that risk, I refuse to do so. I am therefore forced to conclude that you do not believe me. I am now at the point where I have almost exhausted my trust." She rose from the table with a clatter, spilling the wine. "Look what you made me do," she said, laughing. She then realized how foolish she had been. That sounded like a good idea, so I joined her. We proceeded to engage in a series of hugs and kisses, which ultimately led to a trip upstairs. The duration of this excursion was approximately an hour. As we lay in bed, Aaron made a statement to the effect that he would not risk his relationship with me for the sake of a billionaire. I noted that she seemed to assume that we would go to the island after. "Otherwise, what risk is she talking about?" And said, "Okay, then it's decided." She tensed, but she didn't say anything. I inquired as to why she was so eager to go on this trip. I sought only the truth, not __. She did not respond for quite some time. Then, she said, "It seems exciting to be with such an. He is an important and influential individual." I apologize for the confusion. I did not intend to imply that I was referring to him. I was merely attempting to convey that he is a prominent figure in the field of communication. I had the opportunity to study under him, and I can attest to his considerable expertise. Despite his affluence at birth, he has amassed a considerable fortune through his own efforts. He is not averse to pursuing romantic interests, as you are. I still maintain that everything will ultimately be beneficial and enjoyable. Regarding the matter of procreation, we were prepared to commence efforts to conceive a child. Given the possibility of infidelity on Erin's part, it would be prudent for her to act now rather than when we have children. I once held a profound affection for her. She possesses a keen intellect, a vibrant personality, and a striking physical beauty. However, there were also, I must be truthful. I now doubt that. Aaron, we can go, but I must warn you that if you end up under this guy's influence, we will be in a compromising position. There will be no turning back. Do you understand? I am not tempted. The next day will reveal whether I am correct. I accepted the invitation and made contingency arrangements with my friend. I also checked the availability of cellular communications on the island. It is there, but I took my satellite phone with me anyway. The small plane we flew in from National landed at a small airport where we were met by a black man named Simon. He took us to the pier where we boarded a boat with a nice cabin and a powerful engine. The boat was driven by another man named Charlie. After about 40 minutes, we docked at the island. Aaron and I spent some time observing the ocean and other islands. Simon informed us of our location and highlighted the available activities on the island. He is a pleasant individual, larger than me and physically fit. He has a kind smile and a cheerful demeanor. As they approached the pier on the north side of the island, Aaron, Mr. Lake, you appear to be discontented with the excursion. I am Simon. Please address me as Don. I have misgivings about the length of your tenure on the island. It has been 6 years, as I understand it. Therefore, I expect you to be aware of the reasons behind my misgivings. If you are so concerned about the potential developments, why did you come? Additionally, his bodyguard is present for the same reason. In the event of an unforeseen occurrence, the individual in question is a physically imposing figure, capable of self-defense. While there have been instances when the situation did not unfold as anticipated, on those occasions, the individual in question was not required to intervene. However, with the passage of time, the necessity for such intervention has diminished. The individual is prepared to respond if necessary. The value of the work is recognized. You are not armed. I possess a knife, but knives are ubiquitous. Are firearms present on the island? They are prohibited. I assume this is stated in the memorandum you received. However, I do not fully trust her. I am not a particularly trusting individual these days. There are no firearms. I advise you that you will not require them, regardless of the circumstances. The boat was moored in close proximity to the pier, with Simon and the young man on the pier assuming responsibility for securing it. Simon extended his hand to Aaron, and I disembarked. Simon appeared to exhibit a modicum of concern regarding this arrangement. I proceeded to accompany Aaron towards the imposing residence, as Simon had previously indicated. Mr. G met us upon our arrival. The house was occupied by a man who was attired in casual swimwear and a sleeveless shirt. Accompanying him was a woman who was arguably the most beautiful in the world. I observed her as I ascertained who else would be present. This is how I became aware that she was actually Helen Johnson from Jonestown. She was the mistress of the man who was the owner of several houses, including this one. The official mistress on the island, as well as in several houses owned by Mr. G, was occasionally seen in the company of other noblemen, though this was less frequent. Mr. G appears to have received an exclusive agreement, at least in some way. Mr. G extended his hand to shake, and Ella hugged Aaron. She then hugged Aaron, and Ella hugged me. She smelled and felt great during the hug, her lips touched my ear. We were taken to a large room and offered drinks. It was 1, at 10 a.m., a light snack was provided on the aircraft, followed by a small buffet. I abstained from alcohol and consumed sparkling water, while Aaron opted for wine. Both of us ate a modest amount of food from the buffet. During this time, Mr. G inquired about my latest book. I believe I sent it to Sally last week. It is punctual. I am aware that you are consistently punctual, Donald, and that you occasionally arrive even earlier than the scheduled time. Ella inquired about the subject of our discussion. I have read your books, which feature elements such as rock climbing, flying small aircraft, and a romantic interest. Elle expressed enthusiasm and suggested an earlier viewing of the film adaptation. Mr. G expressed support for this idea, but also indicated a willingness to wait until a later date. I then addressed Aaron, inquiring about the current state of affairs in the music industry. I was pleased to learn that everything was progressing well. I suggested that Marjorie's latest publication, Crescendo, would likely be a commercial success. Marjorie Wright, the author of serious fiction, has nevertheless achieved considerable sales, and her work is now appearing on our sales list. However, Donald, she is not as prolific as you and Morgan. Morgan, who goes by the name Belle Starling, is a romance novelist. She is the #1 salesperson in our company. Morgan simply bakes them. I said this in a joking manner. Mr. G laughed and said that it is to my advantage. I reviewed your contract last week and noted that you owe us another book. This is indeed true. Consider the case of Christmas, which is 9 months away, yet the work on it is already in full swing. Elle then asked if I was changing topics. I replied in the affirmative, noting that thrillers sometimes require a respite. I proceeded to discuss the next book, which is a mystery set in an English village. I had conducted research on this topic during our previous summer visit. Elle then asked if I had considered the sales figures for my books, which he described as flattering. The latest book is selling better than the previous one. Aaron interjected that it attracts readers and generates profits for our future. My store is currently profitable. Elle inquired whether I had family money. I replied that I had access to such funds, but that I had not yet drawn on them since the store opened. Mr. G stood up and suggested that, if we had finished lunch, we should go for a swim. He then left the room. Elle said, if you have swimsuits, I will show you to your room and you can change. The three of us stood up, and Ella led us into a large double bedroom, closing the door behind us. We changed into swimsuits. I had regular swimming trunks, but Aaron wore a skimpy pink bikini. I said, this is too much. Who are you trying to impress? To make a favorable impression, I simply aimed to present myself in an aesthetically pleasing manner. Elle was remarkably attractive, and I was confident that my tone was not inappropriate. However, when we arrived at the beach on the island's south side, Elle did not respond favorably. She was wearing an electric blue bikini that was similarly modest as Aaron's. A wooden pathway led to the water's edge. Mr. G was already in the water, swimming behind the breakwaters. Aaron stated, I do not wish to swim that far, to which Ella replied, I concur. I dove into the surf and surfaced, swimming to where Mr. G was cutting through the water with his crawl. I joined him, noting that he was a proficient swimmer for a man of his stature. My body type was more suitable for water, and I was able to maintain a pace with him that allowed me to occasionally change strokes. I continued swimming until he indicated that he was tired. He headed back to shore, and I followed him. When we reached the shore, a large wave knocked him off his feet. I walked up to him and picked him up. He spat out seawater and sand. I held him until he was able to stand on his own. I held him tightly, and we proceeded to walk out. I observed that his legs were akin to wet noodles, likely due to his having overextended himself in a swimming competition with me. However, he swiftly regained his composure and disengaged from my assistance. I reassured him that I was unharmed, stating that the wave had merely caught me off guard. We then approached the women lying on sun lounges in the sun, and I inquired as to who wished to engage in swimming. Ella immediately stood and raised her hand, causing her top to slip slightly. She and I proceeded to the surf. I observed Aaron and noted that she shook her head. I then followed Elle. The view from behind was impressive. She dove into the surf like an Olympian and swam out beyond the breakwaters. I proceeded to follow her example, and it became evident that her swimming abilities were superior to those of Mr. G. We continued to swim in unison for a considerable distance, at which point she vocalized the command to turn, which I promptly executed. I observed a sudden flash of flesh that piqued my interest. I allowed her to gain approximately 4 meters of distance ahead of me and maintained surveillance from the side. She then rotated onto her back, allowing her breasts to sway. In and out of the water, she was an absolutely amazing woman. Backstroke was my specialty, so I joined her, swimming alongside her. We swam a considerable distance, and then she said, I've had enough, and swam to the shore. I waited a moment to look at her from behind when I emerged from the surf. Aaron and Mr. G were nowhere to be seen. I was observed by Elle, who was looking directly at my tight-fitting swimming trunks. She inquired as to whether I was Superman. I responded with a joke, suggesting that there was only one way to ascertain the answer. She took a step towards me, then stopped, stating that we could not engage in this activity in this location, regardless of my desire to do so. She then turned and ran on land. She was not as fast as she was in the water, which I easily overtook. I proceeded to catch up with her, and we proceeded to exit the veranda. I observed that L's companions were absent. I considered the possibility that this event had already occurred. L inquired whether I truly engaged in the activities I claimed to. I responded that while I could not jump between buildings, I was attempting to ascertain the plausibility of Rick's abilities. L gazed at me intently before responding. My erection dissipated, but it returned as she anticipated. She was a woman of considerable influence. I informed L that I was married to an exceptional individual and wished to maintain the sanctity of that bond. I requested that she respect my wishes. I would be grateful if you could do me a favor. Elle laughed, her tongue tied. Oh my God, I said. Let me see what these two are up to. Shall we? Does this matter to you? Oh yeah, please. I want you to understand that I won't be sleeping with you this weekend. Whatever Aaron decides to do, if they get to that point, I'll leave. Most likely, I will regret what I just said for a long time. I smiled. I'm warning you, Donald. It's not easy to shake me off my tail. She entered the house. I waited a few minutes before following her. When I went upstairs to change, I was filled with trepidation. I observed that there was no one in the vicinity. Upon entering our room, however, I discovered that the shower was already in operation. As soon as I entered the room, the shower ceased. Aaron opened the door, wrapped in a towel, and upon seeing me, gasped and inquired as to whether L had already gained my affections. I implored him to understand that I was not going with L and hoped that he would not go with Mr. G either. We had discussed this matter previously, and the situation remained unchanged. He proceeded to inquire about my activities while he and L were swimming. He showed me the swimming pool and the tennis court, and informed me that there was a gym downstairs. He did not mention any sexual activity. I informed him that there had been none. It is plausible that he could be, as it would be too risky. They were unaware of how long L and I would be gone, and I was certain that they were watching us for some time while we were swimming. He was a gentleman, but he will eventually come for you, and you know it. She will come for you as well. He has as much chance of getting me as she has of getting you. She grinned, and I found this response to be somewhat unhelpful. However, I will not do that, and you should not either. We have already discussed this, and there have been no changes. Snacks and drinks will be served at 5. We had the opportunity to engage in romantic activities, and she removed her towel. I must acknowledge that I was still apprehensive due to L's actions, so I approached Aaron with fervor. She reciprocated my feelings when we concluded. We then observed that the windows were open. Aaron stated, well, that is irrelevant. After all, we are married. I observed L on a sun lounger approximately 6 meters away from us. She looked up, smiled, and waved her hand before reaching for her shorts. I moved away from the window, and Aaron noticed that I was experiencing a resurgence of arousal and observed her. Then she gazed out the window, seemingly transfixed for a considerable duration. A groan emanated from the exterior. Aaron turned to me once more, exclaiming, "Oh my God, Donnie. Forget about yourself. She can have me. I can relinquish you. I will not relinquish you." He then proceeded to ridicule me, asserting that I must entreat her to abandon me, otherwise I would be unsuccessful. I had already attempted this approach, yet it did not yield the desired outcome. I surmised that Plato bestowed upon her a challenge with the intention of securing her affections. The circumstances are indeed peculiar, yet it is evident that this phenomenon is a source of fascination. Your interest, Aaron. I promise you that I will not engage in this activity, although you have provided me with considerable assistance. She looked at me. I was still erect. We can have sexual intercourse at least every 2 hours. This should facilitate the process. Perhaps we went down to the main room in casual attire. For me, it was docker shorts and a collared shirt. Aaron put on a dress and let her hair down. She wore high-heeled sandals. Undoubtedly, she appeared attractive when we arrived. Mr. G was drinking beer. He said, "Hey Donald. How was your swim with Elle?" "She is a talented swimmer," Mr. G observed. "This is just one of her many talents." "Call me Plato," she replied. "It's a fine, famous name." "He was a famous guy," Mr. G continued. "May he rest in peace. I loved reading about him." Elle then entered the room. She was also wearing a dress and heels. The dress seemed modest, but on her, it was not. Aaron seemed to feel a little insecure. As I understand it, it was part of the game. Ella had to outshine Aaron, who in turn would try to assert herself by getting. I moved closer to Aaron and put my arm around her shoulders. Plato stated that there were wine, cocktails, beer, and pretzels available. Pretzels are my preferred food, and he was eating one of them as he made this statement. The four of us conversed for a while, and then Ella took me to view the house. It was impressive, and the gym had excellent equipment. I inquired as to whether Plato utilized this equipment. He lifted weights, and she indicated where. He proceeded to the bench where the barbell was installed and lifted a heavy eyelid onto the bench. He then carefully removed it from the racks and made 5 swings, after which he put it back. Elle stood right above me, staring as best she could, and then she said he only makes 3, then he rests. She began to breathe heavily. I then lifted the barbell and did 8 more representatives. He then put her in her place. She then proceeded to enumerate the numerous strengths that I possess, inquiring as to my understanding of my role for the forthcoming weekend. She suggested that I should endeavor to seduce Plato, thereby enabling Donald to assume responsibility for Aaron. This was not the first occasion on which such a suggestion had been made. I am wont to complete any task, even if it is typically an unpalatable one. However, I am confident that I will be able to provide you with a high level of satisfaction. She then bestowed upon me a smile that could only be described as a killer. "If I were to commence a course of begging, would you be willing to cease your current activities?" I was, in fact, being entirely serious. When I made this assertion, she appeared to believe that I was joking. "However, I will derive pleasure from observing you plead." She proceeded to ascend the stairs. I awaited the cessation of my erection and then stood. The 3 of them were gathered together in the living room and engaged in conversation. Upon my arrival, they became silent. Subsequently, Plato stated, "Have something to drink." "Donald, beer, perhaps." I then surveyed the bar and proceeded to retrieve a bottle. I opened a bottle of Corona and offered the others wine. We engaged in further conversation, after which I inquired as to whether they had concluded their discussion of the plot. I then suggested that I depart, as the silence was becoming awkward. Elise, who had been observing the other 2, mostly Aaron, turned to him and said, "No secrets." At that moment, Simon arrived and announced that dinner was ready. We proceeded to the dining room, where the table was set with dishes. The buffet table provided a familial atmosphere, with seating arranged at one end of a large table. While beverages were available, I opted to consume beer and abstain from water. During the course of our conversation, he addressed the tense situation I had created. We proceeded to engage in a cordial discussion about politics and baseball. I informed him that I was a Yankees fan, while Aaron and I supported the Orioles and Nationals. I also expressed my affinity for the Pirates and my hometown. Simon served dessert, but I missed mine. Plato seemed to notice this, and he proceeded to engage in a discourse on the merits of abstaining from dessert. He then made a remark about my waistline, suggesting that I maintain a certain level of physical fitness. He also made a jocular reference to my lack of body fat, and he proceeded to describe a scene in which he had observed me swimming. He then made a remark about my beverage preferences, stating that I only drink beer and not water. Before we arrived at this gathering, I had already informed my wife that I was in need of reassurance. I had depleted my reservoir of trust, and I was seeking confirmation that my expectations would be met. Aaron then interjected with a question directed at Plato, inquiring about his belief in the likelihood of a particular outcome. He alluded to the consumption of a substance that was prohibited. This was an irrational suggestion. I smiled and offered Plato a glass of water, encouraging him to eat and drink. Plato smiled and accepted the glass of water, but his demeanor remained stoic. Then he said, "Simon." When Simon arrived, Plato said, "Please clear the table." Simon observed the rearrangement of the water and dessert. He picked up my glass of water and the remaining tiramisu. He proceeded to escort them to the courtyard where music was scheduled to be performed and they could dance. Aaron and Plato remained silent. I stood up and extended my hand to Elle, which he took and led her to the patio. Upon our arrival, she turned to me and inquired about my assertion that he was responsible for the food and water. She questioned whether I truly believed that he would attempt to poison me and, if so, whether I thought he would succeed. I replied that I did not believe he would attempt such a thing, but that he had not taken either the food or the water. Subsequently, he requested that his partner remove them. The other two emerged, accompanied by a gentle melody. I approached Aaron, grasped her elbow, and guided her away from Plato and into the open area. We proceeded to dance, a pastime she typically engaged in as well. Initially, she exhibited a certain degree of reserve, but as I became more at ease, she gradually became more intimate, pressing herself close to me and whispering, "I love you, Donnie." "I love you too, Aaron." We continued dancing until the music ceased. We then proceeded to a table where Plato and Elle were seated. The music began anew, and Elle stood, extending her hand to me. She led me to the floor, where we danced. I observed Plato dancing with Aaron. Elle may have been the most effective form of distraction, with a sweet, subtle scent and the curves of her body. She placed me in a trance-like state with her actions. I was immediately delighted to observe that Plato's hands were once again on Aaron's buttocks. There was no indication that she was pushing them away. I pulled away from Elle and walked the short distance to Aaron and Plato, where I stood and observed them. Aaron saw me and attempted to move away from Plato. He continued to keep his hands on her buttocks. She lightly pushed him on the chest and said, "I don't want problems, Plato. Let go." He released her, but he took her hand and led her back to the table. Ella returned after me, and we sat down. She was situated in close proximity to me. Aaron held Plato's hand as they sat adjacent to each other. Plato stated, "I am profoundly disillusioned with you, Donald. Ella is an exceptional lover. She will bestow upon you one of the most exhilarating and gratifying experiences of your life. Nevertheless, you are denying her that opportunity. This opportunity was presented to me in the context of my marital status and the understanding that I would not engage in any further transactions. This is how we arrived at the point that was initially discussed." I turned to Aaron and stated that either he or I would not entertain any intermediary options. She removed her hand from his, but she looked at me and said that it would only be for the weekend and that everything would resume to its previous state on Monday. She suggested that I could have some fun with Elle for now. I looked at her closely and stated that I would not do it. I inquired as to whether she was joking. I was even willing to accept the possibility of the dissolution of our relationship. However, I was perplexed by the notion that my response would have such an impact. I extended my hand, which she accepted. I then pulled her towards me and kissed her deeply, running my hands up and down her body. He then pulled away, and I was overwhelmed with emotion. I managed to utter the words that I had been struggling to say. The mere fact that affirmation of consent to engage in sexual intercourse with this individual signifies the dissolution of our relationship. It is the end of our relationship. I turned and proceeded towards the stairs, whereupon she screamed, "No, Donnie, no." I proceeded to the top of the stairs, retrieved my bag that I had packed earlier, and exited the residence via the rear fire escape. I made the call and proceeded into the darkness. While running, I continued to hear screams for approximately 20 minutes. I then heard a plane, which had splashed down in the vicinity of the southern dock and proceeded to swim towards me. My acquaintance Todd Jacobs was piloting the aircraft. I was walking in his direction when Plato and Simon suddenly appeared behind me. Plato loudly proclaimed, "It is futile to attempt to escape. It would be more prudent to remain here and attempt to compose yourself. Your wife is down." He advanced rapidly toward me. I was already at the pier. Plato was uncontrollable and in no condition to fight. Simon remained at a distance, perhaps because Todd had a gun pointed at him. I threw Plato into the water, where he floundered, shouting, "You're fired." I proceeded to board the plane and Todd taxied it. We subsequently flew to he had a vehicle at a small lake near Dulles, which he made available for me. I remunerated him for his services and proceeded to Alexandria. The route was devoid of illumination, and the surrounding area was desolate. My residence was similarly shrouded in darkness. I entered the house and surveyed the interior, taking in images of happier times and photographs of our relatives. I was taken aback and sat in a chair, gazing into space. This was the prelude to my slumber, which commenced at 8 o'clock. In the morning, I was awakened by the sound of a car outside. I looked out and saw Aaron getting out of some rental car. She carried her bag to the door, unlocked it, and went inside. I stood and looked at her, and she stood motionless, looking at me. She appeared to be in a state of distress, as though she was experiencing a sense of self-reproach. In my entire life, I have never experienced such a significant misstep, and I am confident that I will never make a similar mistake again. I am determined not to lose you, Donnie. Aaron, what were your expectations when you chose to facilitate Plato's involvement? Did you believe that I would be unaware of this arrangement due to my involvement with Elle? I acknowledge that I made a misjudgment. I was naive and misguided. Please clarify whether you and Plato devised this plan. She looked down, not really engaging with the subject at hand. He suggested that when we arrived at our destination, there might be a substitution. I had anticipated this possibility and believed that I would decline the proposal and that it would end there. However, you did not decline, you agreed to the plan on the condition that you accompany Elle. I observed your enthusiasm and eagerness. Given the circumstances, it is reasonable to posit that we would have rekindled our marriage and had children, had we been able to trust each other. However, I had already come to recognize that such a relationship was untenable. I regarded it as an ephemeral phenomenon, a mere sideshow, when I saw that we both had the potential for an exceptional experience. I smiled, understanding why you thought my experience with Elle would be the epitome of such an experience. I am curious as to why you believed Plato to be a superior choice to me. He elicited excitement in me, he is older and stronger, and he knew how to gain my attention. I do not recall ever considering him to be a better option than you, I simply saw him as a different choice. Aaron, how can I be certain that this will not happen again? There are numerous other individuals like Plato in the world and he is still around. I did not intend to cheat, Donnie. Everything was evident to you. I merely assumed you would concur. Well, that is, you declined her, so I am aware you would never concur since you rejected her. Indeed, I am uncertain as to how you are the same person I met. If she were married, she would not relocate to be seduced by another man. Donnie, might we consider observing the subsequent developments? We have always enjoyed excellent sexual intercourse, we both desire it. We can continue in this manner while you devote your time to distrusting me. She rose from the table and removed her clothing. I contemplated turning away, but she did not. She led me upstairs, where we engaged in sexual intercourse. This is the only aspect of our relationship that has remained constant, and it is likely to continue to do so. As soon as we enter the bedroom, we become sexually aroused. I allowed her to return home. 10 years later, I collected the children from school. It was 3. The children's ages are as follows: 15-year-old Jessica Aika is 8, Robert is 6, and Helen, who does not yet attend school, is 3. I was a stay-at-home parent. I was a homemaker, but I had a capable woman coming to assist me, and I had the chance to write. It took over a year before I trusted Aaron enough to let her stop taking her medication. When she did, our sex life improved significantly. I terminated my contract with my previous publisher, Sally, and began working on something new. The first book I wrote was about adventures on an island. Everything was connected. In truth, this is the reality of the situation. I was compelled to suspend myself from the plane's flotation device before boarding after overcoming Simon and his accomplices. Additionally, the antagonist's wife was administered illicit substances to elicit her desire for the villain. However, the antagonist was ultimately cast into the ocean. The book achieved remarkable commercial success, and I secured a film adaptation deal that encompassed my previous 3 novels. Plato could not object to this outcome. In the new book, he is cast in the role of Socrates. If he were to accept the role, he would be burdened with the responsibility of representing the truth of what happened. Aaron now has 2 sources of income. I earn a significant amount of money. Before I fully accepted her back, she signed a post-nuptial agreement which affects both of us. There's been no infidelity. The school year has begun, and when I was driving the two older children home in a car, another vehicle approached our entrance. It was a small red sports model. The driver exited the vehicle and we were greeted by the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen smiled and waved to the children. The children ran up to her, shouting, "Aunt Helen," and she greeted them warmly. Young Helen welcomed her at the door as she entered the house. I prepared a seltzer, her favorite beverage, and informed her that Aaron would arrive shortly. I also prepared a high-calorie salad and everything else was ready. The subject's room, however, is a topic for another discussion. Subscribe to our channel to avoid the infidelity of your second-in-command and proceed with the next story, which is of a more salacious nature. Individuals under the age of 18 should refrain from listening to the next story.